Joe Louis was about to sign his life away. Then Bumpy Johnson walked in with a razor. The room smelled of ink and sweat. A contract waited like a blade. Joe Louis leaned forward. Then Bumpy Johnson stepped in, quiet as a threat, carrying something sharp that changed everything. The office smelled like ink, sweat, and something sharper, fear barely contained. A polished wooden desk stretched between Joe Louis and the man holding the pen. The contract lay there, stiff and official, like it had teeth. Every signature would mark more than paper. It could mark a life. Joe shifted in his chair. His fingers drummed on the leather, a nervous rhythm. Money was on the table. Promises that glittered. Promises that could trap. He'd been told this was routine. A formality. A handshake. But routine had teeth too. The door opened quietly. No warning. No fanfare. Just Bumpy Johnson, calm as a Sunday morning, stepping in with the kind of presence that doesn't ask for attention. It takes it. A razor glinted at his side, catching the light just enough to remind everyone that even the smallest detail could slice deep. Eyes followed him. Breath slowed. Men who thought themselves untouchable suddenly felt exposed. There was no shout, no demand, just a look. One glance from Bumpy, and the room seemed smaller, the walls closer. The contract, heavy on the desk, now felt like a weapon pointed the wrong way. Joe exhaled, not out of fear, not exactly, but out of understanding. Decisions were being watched. Lines were being drawn. And in this room, power didn't come from the pen. It came from a man who didn't need to lift a hand to change the story. Bumpy stepped closer, just a few feet from the desk. The silence grew. Negotiators and promoters shifted uneasily. Every paper on that desk suddenly mattered less than the man who could end the negotiation with one word or one motion. And in that quiet, the first choice was made. Joe Louis wasn't signing his life away. Not tonight. Not while Bumpy was in the room. Harlem didn't whisper about power. It felt it. You didn't announce respect. You earned it, and Bumpy Johnson carried it like a second skin. Every block, every corner store knew his name. And tonight, that quiet authority pressed into the room like a tide. The men around the desk shifted, trying to measure him. How do you size up someone who doesn't need to prove anything? Bumpy didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture. He didn't even touch the contract. But the way he stood, shoulders squared, calm, eyes scanning, told everyone exactly who owned the room. Joe Louis watched him, a mix of relief and awe. Bumpy's presence was protection, yes, but also a statement. You could threaten him, bribe him, push him, and it wouldn't matter. Loyalty wasn't bought here. It was recognized. Harlem had its rules, and Bumpy lived by them. Outside, the city hummed with life, unaware of the tension inside that small office. But those who knew, knew. Crossing Bumpy meant more than losing money or pride. It meant answering to a community that had long memories. Every insult, every slight, every betrayal was cataloged, and Bumpy ensured they were never forgotten. The men who tried to push Joe forward, to force the pen into his hand, suddenly felt the weight of decades. Every minor threat they had rehearsed crumbled under the quiet gravity of a man who didn't need to act. Harlem measured a man in silence, in restraint, in the way he commanded loyalty without a single blow. And in that moment, Bumpy was the standard. Joe shifted again, glancing at the contract. It suddenly seemed smaller than the man standing next to him. He realized something vital. Agreements weren't about signatures. They were about who walked in the room and made everyone else rethink their courage. And right now, that man was Bumpy Johnson. The room had grown quieter, not because anyone had asked for it, but because Bumpy made it so. The men across the desk tried to speak, tried to push, tried to force the rhythm they thought they controlled, but the air had thickened. It wasn't fear they felt exactly. It was awareness. Awareness that every word, every motion, every pause was being judged. Joe Louis sat straighter. The contract still lay in front of him, its edges sharp under the lamplight. The promoters leaned in, pressing him to commit. It's just business, one said. Nothing personal. But Bumpy's presence made those words sound hollow, almost foolish. Business here carried a different weight. Life carried a different weight. Bumpy didn't move. He didn't gesture. His hand rested lightly on the desk, not threatening, but enough to anchor the room. The razor, tucked at his side, wasn't a weapon he needed to show. It was a reminder, a subtle punctuation mark on the sentence of authority. The pressure wasn't physical. It didn't need to be. It was in the stillness, in the way Bumpy let silence stretch, letting tension do the work that fists usually did. Men who thought control came from shouting, from leaning in, from handshakes, realized they were puppets without strings. And the puppeteer didn't speak. He just existed. Joe's mind raced. Every choice had consequences. A signature now could have meant debts, betrayals, headlines, danger. But Bumpy's calm dominance reframed the room. Choices were his to make, and nothing external could force them. In that moment, the young champion understood something essential about power. It doesn't shout. It waits. It watches. And when it moves without haste, leaving no doubt. The silence stretched. A bead of sweat slid down one promoter's temple. Another cleared his throat, as if pretending the moment wasn't crushing him. But Bumpy remained unshaken, a living anchor. And slowly, subtly, the pressure shifted from Joe to those trying to push him. Their urgency faltered, their bravado became brittle. And all Bumpy needed to do was stand there, letting the room bend quietly around him. Then it came, the jab, a comment meant for all to hear, a slight aimed at Joe Louis but echoing through the entire room. It was careless, arrogant, the kind of insult thrown when men think power comes from words alone. Bumpy didn't flinch. He didn't step forward. He didn't even raise his voice. He let the insult hang, suspended, heavy in the air. And in that silence, it grew sharper than any blade. The men who spoke realized too late. Disrespect in Bumpy's presence was never forgotten, never forgiven, but rarely punished the way they expected. Joe shifted in his chair, jaw tight. He knew this was a test, not just of patience, but of perception. Everyone in that room had a debt now, whether they recognized it or not. Loyalty wasn't bought with money. It was earned in how you treated those who could see through every lie, every bluff, every half-measure. Bumpy's eyes scanned the room slowly, deliberately, not in anger, but in calculation. The man who had spoken the insult felt it like a weight pressing against his chest. Every corner of the room sensed the shift. The power dynamic had changed, subtly, but irrevocably. The public mockery had exposed weakness, and Bumpy's calm presence magnified it. No one moved. No one spoke. The insult had been delivered, but its consequences were quiet, almost invisible, yet undeniable. Men who thought themselves untouchable now measured their words, their gestures, their very existence. And Joe, watching it all, understood a crucial truth. In this world, respect wasn't demanded. It was observed quietly and enforced without noise. Bumpy remained still, like a shadow anchored to the floor. And in that quiet, the room's unspoken debts were cataloged. Every glance, every twitch, every shift in posture told a story. By the time the silence broke, it was clear who controlled more than contracts or money. It was clear who commanded respect, loyalty, and the unseen rules of the room. The room held its breath, not because anyone expected violence, but because everyone knew it was possible. The razor at Bumpy's side gleamed softly, a quiet punctuation in a room saturated with tension. It wasn't a threat shouted. It was a statement whispered through presence. Joe Louis leaned back slightly, letting the weight of Bumpy's authority settle over him. The contract had not moved. The pens remained untouched, but the energy in the room had shifted. The men who had tried to push, to rush, to control, they now hesitated. Their bravado had evaporated under the steady gaze of a man who didn't need to raise his hand. Bumpy stepped forward, just enough to close the distance between threat and reality. He didn't speak. One small gesture, the tilt of his head, the tightening of his jaw, conveyed more than 1,000 words. The room recognized it instantly. This was not a man to bargain with lightly. He measured power in restraint, in patience, in the exact moment to act. And tonight he had chosen observation over reaction. Silence became a weapon. The promoters' nerves frayed, their speeches faltered. Each second stretched, pulled taut by Bumpy's calm. The razor, tucked neatly at his side, was a reminder that consequences were real, even if they weren't immediate. No one wanted to be the first to break the quiet, because breaking it meant stepping into the wrong territory. Joe Louis finally exhaled. The decision that had seemed inevitable, the signing, the concession, now felt unnecessary. He didn't need to force the pen. He didn't need to negotiate. He had Bumpy Johnson in the room, and that was enough. Power, he realized, was not in contracts or threats, but in the stillness of a man who commanded the room without raising his voice. And just like that, without a shout, without a single strike, the moment was controlled. The balance had tipped. The room had learned what Bumpy had always known. True domination was quiet, measured, and absolute. The contract remained on the desk, untouched, but the room felt different. Every man in that office left, carrying more than the papers they came for. They carried the lesson Bumpy had imposed without a word, without violence. Respect is earned, power is silent, and loyalty is visible only when tested. Joe Louis rose, his shoulders straighter than when he had entered. The deal had not been signed, but he understood now what mattered most. The choices he made in that room would echo far beyond it. Money could be counted. Contracts could be broken, but a reputation, once tempered in the presence of Bumpy Johnson, was permanent. The men who had tried to force the signature left quietly, heads lowered. Each step was a reminder that the balance of power had shifted. Public insults had been cataloged. Private debts had been noted. Every action had consequences, subtle or sharp, and everyone in the room had learned their place. Bumpy stayed behind only for a moment longer, his eyes scanning the room one last time. The razor at his side was still there, yet it was almost ornamental now, a symbol of restraint rather than aggression. He understood what real power meant, walking out without leaving a mess, leaving only clarity. And when he finally left, the room exhaled collectively. The city outside had no idea what had just transpired, but those who mattered in Harlem felt the impact immediately. Contracts could be renegotiated. Deals could be rewritten. But the legacy, the quiet authority, the calm dominance, the unshakable respect was untouchable. Joe Louis stepped forward, finally alone with his decision. He carried the understanding that would guide him beyond that room. Some men aren't measured by what they take, but by what they prevent. And Bumpy Johnson, razor at his side, had just prevented everything that could have destroyed him. The contract might stay, but the story, his story, had changed forever.